A woman can spend 20 years learning how to keep hearts beating, and still have no earthly idea how to save her own. The harbor was dark when Helena Bouchard reached the waterfront. October in Halifax had a way of arriving before anyone was ready. The cold slipping off the Atlantic in layers, carrying salt and something older, something that settled into the bones and stayed. She had driven here without deciding to. That was how it worked now. Every morning before 5, she woke in the bedroom that was still half Edmund's, pulled on whatever clothes her hands found in the dark and ended up here. Bench at the far end of the lower boardwalk. Same view of the harbor lights, same cold. She hadn't gone back to the hospital in 11 weeks. 11 weeks of leave that her department head had called necessary, and her colleagues had called deserved, and Helena called nothing, because naming it made it real. Edmund Bouchard had died on a Tuesday in February. Massive myocardial infarction. The same event she diagnosed in strangers 4 days a week. The same damage she reversed with hands steady enough to thread a catheter through an artery no wider than a pencil. She had been mid-surgery when the hospital called. Her husband's heart had stopped 3 floors below her, while she was busy saving someone else's. She had not operated since. People said grief was a wave. They said it knocked you down and eventually pulled back. But Helena had been a doctor long enough to know that bodies didn't follow metaphors. Grief, in her experience, looked more like scar tissue. It didn't go away, it organized itself around the wound and changed the shape of everything nearby. Edmund's running shoes were still by the front door. His mug was still in the cabinet. She had once reached for the wrong side of the bed in the dark, and lain there with her hand on the cold sheet for a very long time before she understood where she was. The photograph was in her jacket pocket. It always was. Edmund at the lake 2 summers ago, squinting into the sun, laughing at something she had said. She couldn't remember what. That was the thing she was most afraid of. Not forgetting him entirely, but losing the specific things. His laugh first, then the exact pitch of his voice on the phone, then the way he mispronounced particularly 4 syllables when it should have been 5, a habit she had teased him about for 16 years. The small things went first. She knew that from medicine. She knew it now from loss. She pressed the photograph flat against her thigh, through the coat fabric, and stared at the harbor. That was when something shuffled behind her. She turned. A boy stood at the edge of the boardwalk, maybe 8 years old, wearing a hoodie that was at least 2 sizes too small. No coat, no hat. His hands were pushed up into his sleeves, and he was looking at her with the kind of direct, unhurried attention that only very young children and very old people could sustain. Brown eyes, mud on his left sneaker. A folded piece of paper sticking out of his front pocket. "Why are you crying?" he said, "if you're not hurt." Helena touched her face. She hadn't realized she was. "I am hurt," she said. It came out before she could stop it. The boy considered this. He walked closer, not cautious, just careful. The way children moved when they were concentrating on something that mattered. He sat down on the far end of the bench and looked out at the water the same way she had been looking at it. "I couldn't sleep either," he said. Helena looked at him, at the hoodie, at his bare wrists in the October air. "Where do you live?" "On Grafton, with Mrs. Arsenault." He picked at the edge of the bench. "She says I can stay there while my mom is in the hospital." "Your mom is in the hospital?" "Yeah." Pause. "She's been there a while." His voice didn't break. It was flat, with the particular flatness of a child who had been made to say that sentence many times. To teachers, to neighbors, to whoever asked. Not bravely, not dramatically. Just the way a person said a fact that had been true long enough to stop feeling like news. Helena felt something shift in her chest. Not pain, something older and quieter. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jamie." He glanced over. "What's yours?" "Helena." "That's a long name. I've never thought about it." He pulled his hands further into his sleeves. The morning was getting lighter at the edges, the harbor going from black to gray, the cranes across the water becoming shapes. She noticed his lips were pale. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. Jamie shrugged one shoulder. "Since before it was light. Mrs. Arsenault doesn't wake up until 7 and I was hungry." He said it the way. He said everything, no request inside it, just information. "I thought there might be something open." Helena thought of her kitchen. She had stopped cooking 8 months ago. Her neighbor Pauline still left casseroles on the step twice a week, and Helena moved them from the door to the fridge to the garbage without opening them. The pantry was full. The refrigerator was full. She couldn't eat because eating alone at that table was a thing she hadn't learned how to do yet. She looked at Jamie, pale lips, bare wrists, a too small hoodie on a Halifax morning in October. "There's a bakery," she said, "on Barrington. It opens at 5:30. He looked at her. "Is it far?" 10 minutes. "I don't have any money." "I do." Jamie considered this the way he considered everything else, steadily without rushing. Then he said, "Okay, not grateful, not suspicious, Just agreed the way you agreed to something that made sense. They walked. Helena set the pace slow because his sneakers were mismatched. Not two different sizes, she realized, but two different shoes entirely. She didn't say anything. The bakery was just unlocking when they arrived. A small place Helena had been to twice in the years she'd lived in Halifax, both times with Edmund. The woman behind the counter had flour on her forearms, and didn't ask any questions. Helena ordered coffee and orange juice and 2 croissants. And, because she hadn't eaten since she couldn't remember when, a second croissant for herself that she hadn't planned on until she was already paying. They sat at the counter by the window. Jamie wrapped both hands around the juice glass. He drank slowly at first, then less slowly. He ate the croissant in sections, methodical, nothing wasted, nothing left behind. Helena watched without appearing to watch. "What's wrong with your mom?" she asked when he'd finished. "Her liver." Jamie smoothed the napkin flat against the counter. "The doctor said it's complicated." He said the word the way adults had probably said it to him. With that particular weight, that careful choosing. The kind of word that meant we're not going to tell you everything. She used to work at the hotel on the waterfront. She was really good at it. "Used to?" "She got sick in June." He was quiet for a moment. "She's not working right now." Helena held her coffee cup. Outside the window, the harbor was silver under low cloud. The morning fully arrived. She watched a container ship move slowly between the breakwater markers, all its lights still on. "My husband died," she said. She didn't know why she said it. She hadn't said it to a stranger in weeks. People at the hospital knew, Pauline knew. But Helena had developed a habit of being somewhere else when the sentence needed saying. Busy with her coat, already moving. Anything to avoid the particular stillness that those 3 words created in a room. Jamie didn't create any stillness, he just looked at her. "When?" he asked. "February, 8 months ago." He nodded once. "My dad left when I was 5. I know that's not the same thing." "No," Helena said, "but it's also a kind of disappearing." Jamie looked at the table. "I keep forgetting what he looked like," he said quietly. "I can remember his smell though. He wore this green jacket and it smelled like the laundry soap my mom bought. I still remember that." He picked up his juice again. "Is it weird to remember a smell better than a face?" Helena's hand tightened around her coffee cup. She had been living that exact fear for 8 months. Not of forgetting Edmund completely. She didn't believe she could. But of losing the specific things. The way his voice dropped at the end of a sentence when he was tired. The particular warmth of his hand. The sound of him on the stairs at midnight. When he couldn't sleep and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. She kept the photograph because she was scared the details would erode without proof. She kept his pillow on his side of the bed, because she was afraid that moving it would mean admitting where he used to be. "It's not weird," she said. "I'm afraid of forgetting too." Jamie looked at her the way he had looked at her on the boardwalk, directly, without filling the silence with anything unnecessary. "You're a doctor, right?" he said. "You have that thing on your keychain." She looked down the hospital lanyard. She'd forgotten she was wearing it. "Yes," she said. "My mom likes her doctor." He rearranged the napkin into a careful square. "She says she's kind. She says not all of them are." Helena didn't answer immediately. She thought of the 11 weeks. The patients she hadn't seen. The surgeries she had declined. The messages from colleagues she had let go unread. Telling herself she was resting. Telling herself she wasn't ready. But sitting here beside a boy in a too small hoodie who had walked to the harbor before daylight, because he was hungry and couldn't sleep. Helena felt something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. Shame, not the ordinary kind. The kind that arrived when you understood the precise shape of what you had stopped doing. She had spent 8 months keeping everyone at a careful distance because proximity hurt. She had locked the door on her own life, and called it grief and let it stand. But her grief had a bed and a full refrigerator and a lanyard, with a card that could still open doors in the morning. Jamie's hunger did not. She folded her hands around her coffee cup and looked at him properly. "What do you do for food when Mrs. Arsenault doesn't cook?" she asked. He shrugged. "There's usually something, crackers, peanut butter. Sometimes she forgets to go to the grocery store." He said it without blame. "She's pretty old, she has a lot to remember." Helena reached into her jacket pocket and took out the photograph of Edmund. She laid it on the counter between them. "This is my husband," she said, "Edmund." Jamie leaned in to look. "He's laughing." He laughed a lot. She looked at the photograph herself the way she always did, searching as if each viewing might yield something she hadn't yet noticed. "He was better at it than I was, at just being happy in ordinary moments. I used to think he was too cheerful, that he didn't take enough things seriously." She paused. "I would give a great deal to have that back." Jamie was quiet. Then he pulled the folded piece of paper from his hoodie pocket and smoothed it open on the counter beside the photograph. It was a drawing in pencil crayon, 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one very small, standing in front of a house with a crooked chimney. My mom drew this, he said. Before she got sick, she's a good drawer. He touched the tallest figure with one finger. That's supposed to be my dad, but she put him in anyway. She said even if someone's gone you can still put them in a picture. Helena looked at the drawing, 3 figures. A family not whole but placed inside a frame together. She thought of Edmund's mug in the cabinet, his shoes by the front door. She had kept them exactly where they were for 8 months, telling herself that stillness was love, that if nothing moved, time might not quite confirm what it had done. But Jamie's mother had drawn the absent person into the picture, not denied that he was gone, not pretended things were unchanged, just included him, let the family be the family, even broken. That was a different kind of keeping. Something cracked open in Helena, not wide, not dramatic, the way a window opens in a room that has been shut all winter, just enough for the air to change. She sounds like a wise woman, Helena said. She's the smartest person I know. He folded the drawing back along its original creases. Even sick, she's the smartest. Helena looked at him. The hoodie, the mismatched shoes. The drawing returned to his pocket with the care of someone placing something valuable back in its right place. What's your mother's name? She asked. Grace, he said it simply, Grace Thibodeau. Helena put Edmund's photograph back in her pocket. She looked out at the harbor. The morning was fully gray now, the water flat silver, the cranes visible and still. A morning exactly like the 11 mornings before it and the 11 weeks of mornings before those. Except this one had Jamie in it, who had walked to the waterfront before daylight because he was hungry, who carried his entire world in a folded piece of paper in his pocket. She thought of Edmund, not with the consuming, suffocating grief she had grown used to, but with something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Gratitude for the 16 years, for the mispronounced words, for the ordinary Tuesday mornings she had been too busy to notice were something. She could not go back and notice them now. But she could notice this one. Jamie, she said. Will you let me take you somewhere warm before school? He looked at her. I'm not in school right now, Mrs. Arsenault said we'd sort it out later. Helena set her coffee cup down carefully. How long have you not been in school? Since September. Mom went to the hospital in June. September happened. She heard it clearly. The thing that had simply fallen away, the way things fell away when a family was in crisis, and there was no one steady enough to catch them. Something firm and clear rose up in her. Not grief, something that lived beside grief but was built of different material entirely. A kind of wakefulness, the return of a reflex she thought had gone quiet forever. She was a cardiologist. She fixed things. She had spent 11 weeks convincing herself she was too broken to fix anything. But this boy had no school registration, no adequate food, no winter coat, and a mother in a hospital, and none of that required a cardiology degree to address. It only required someone willing to look directly at what was in front of them. Edmund would have been on his phone already, calling the district office, calling the hospital, asking Helena if she still had that contact at Family Services. Edmund had never been confused about what to do when a situation needed a person. Helena had spent their marriage teasing him for it, calling him impulsive, telling him to slow down, to assess, to think it through. She understood now that he had been thinking it through. He'd just thought faster. She put her hand flat on the counter. I have a car, she said. I have a house with a warm kitchen and more food than I can eat. I have a phone that can call your mother's hospital and find out exactly what's happening and who to speak to. She paused. Would that be all right with you? Jamie studied her, not afraid, not rushing toward the offer either, just thinking. Mrs. Arsenault worries, he said. We can call her first. She doesn't like her cell phone. She says the buttons are too small. Does she have a landline? He brightened slightly. Yeah, in the kitchen on the wall. Good. Helena flagged the woman behind the counter. She ordered a bag of pastries to take, enough for a woman who had a telephone on her kitchen wall and had opened her home to someone else's child. She paid without counting what it cost. Then she stood and picked up her jacket. Shh. Ready? Jamie slid off the counter stool. He looked at the bag, then at her. Is some of that for Mrs. Arsenault? All of it is. He nodded seriously, as if this had been the correct answer all along. She likes the ones with jam in them. Helena bought 2 extra. They called Mrs. Arsenault from the car. Helena spoke to her directly, introduced herself, explained where Jamie was and that he was safe. The woman on the other end was sharp and relieved in equal measure, and confessed that she had looked in at 5:30, and found his bed empty, and had been trying to decide what to do. Helena gave her the name of a family services contact she knew from the hospital. Someone she had referred patients to before, someone thorough, and said she would follow up that same morning. Mrs. Arsenault said quietly, he's a good boy, he never complains, that's the part that worries me. Helena looked at Jamie in the passenger seat. He was watching a seagull on a telephone wire with complete concentration. "I know," she said, "that's what worries me too." At her house, she opened the pantry for the first time in weeks and actually looked at it. The canned soup, the protein bars Pauline had left, the loaf of bread from Thursday. She set water to boil and cut an apple and found the peanut butter in the back of the cabinet and put all of it on the counter. Jamie sat at the kitchen table and watched her move the way he watched everything, with unhurried, complete attention. "Do you want tea?" she asked. "I've never had tea." "Hot chocolate." He looked at the counter. "You have hot chocolate?" She checked, a box of it still sealed from last Christmas. Edmund had bought it because he always kept hot chocolate in the cabinet. He said it was for emergencies. She had rolled her eyes at the time. "Yes," she said. She made it properly, stovetop with milk, the way her mother had made it in the house she grew up in a way she hadn't made it since she was a child. She put the mug in front of Jamie and watched him curve both hands around it, the way he had curved his hands around the juice glass at the bakery, as if warmth were something you needed to hold on to before it left. "It's warm all the way to the bottom," he said softly. She sat down across from him, Edmund's chair. She hadn't sat across from anyone at this table in 8 months. The kitchen felt strange, not because it had changed but because something in it had shifted. There was a child at the table. There was steam rising from a mug. There were crumbs forming on the placemat that she would sweep up later without thinking about it. Ordinary, impermanent, alive. The kitchen had not felt alive in a very long time. After Jamie ate, Helena called the hospital. It took 3 transfers before she reached the ward where Grace Thibodeau was being treated. She introduced herself professionally, and the floor supervisor was specific and clear. Grace was stable but would require extended care. A social worker had been assigned, but the file hadn't been fully updated, because Jamie had been placed informally with the neighbor, and certain things had simply slipped through. Helena took the social worker's name and direct extension. Then, she called the school board. Then she sat back down at the kitchen table and looked at Jamie, who had fallen asleep in Edmund's chair, with his head resting on his folded arms, the drawing of his family still pressed into the pocket of his too small hoodie. She looked at him for a long time. She had been afraid for 11 weeks, that moving forward meant moving away from Edmund. That healing was a betrayal. That returning to the hospital, returning to work, returning to any version of her own life, was a way of consenting to a world that had continued without him. But she thought of what Grace Thibodeau had done from a hospital bed, had drawn the absent person into the picture anyway. Not pretended he was there, not denied he was gone. Just put him in the frame with the crooked chimney and kept the drawing in her son's pocket so the family could travel together. Helena could not put Edmund back in the kitchen. But she could stop standing outside every room of her own house. She picked up her phone and sent a message to her department head. 8 words, "I think I'm ready to come back, next week?" Then she went to the hall closet and found one of Edmund's old sweaters. Thick wool, dark green. The one that smelled like the laundry soap they'd used since they moved to Halifax. And brought it to the kitchen and laid it gently over Jamie's shoulders. He didn't wake up. He shifted slightly, pulling the warmth closer, and his face went quiet in the particular way sleeping children's faces went quiet. As if all the work of being careful in a hard world had been, just for now, set down. The reply from her department head came in 4 minutes. "Yes, Monday, we're so glad, welcome back." Helena read it. Read it again. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, across from Edmund's chair where a child was sleeping in a dead man's sweater, and she did something she hadn't done in 11 weeks. She stayed. She made herself another cup of tea. She let the October light come in through the kitchen window. She did not drive back to the harbor. She sat in her own kitchen on a Tuesday morning in Halifax and she waited for the child to wake up, because he would wake up. And when he did there were phone calls left to make, and a coat to find and a school that needed to know his name. And because Jamie was still sleeping, she took Edmund's photograph from her pocket one more time. She looked at it, not with the desperate searching focus she had used every morning for 8 months. Just looked. His face, the lake, the way he was laughing at something she couldn't remember. She let herself not remember. She let the moment in the photograph be complete without her. It had been real, it had been enough, it was still his. Folded in her pocket, traveling with her, part of the frame wherever she went now. She was not forgetting. She was only learning that love did not require her to stand still. They visited Grace Thibodeau together that afternoon. Jamie wore a new coat Helena had bought without deliberating over the cost, and Helena wore her hospital lanyard for the first time in 11 weeks. Grace was awake and thin and had the same steady direct eyes as her son. She held Jamie's hand and looked at Helena over his head with the particular look of a mother who needed to know whether someone was safe. Helena met her eyes and nodded once. It was not a complicated exchange. Sometimes the necessary things didn't need to be. On the drive home, Jamie fell asleep in the back seat. Helena watched him in the rearview mirror. The new coat, the folded drawing visible through the pocket, the face that looked like his mother's when it was at rest. She thought about what he had asked on the boardwalk. Why are you crying if you're not hurt? She had been hurt, she still was, that hadn't changed. But she understood now that hurt and useful were not opposites. That a cracked thing could still hold water. That a heart broken in February could still, with the right kind of mourning, the right kind of question from the right kind of stranger on a cold bench at the edge of Halifax Harbor, find something worth beating for. She drove home through the city, the water on her left, the cranes standing quietly against the pale afternoon sky, a sleeping child in the back seat, and Edmund's green sweater folded on the passenger seat beside her. For the first time in 8 months, the silence did not feel like absence. It felt like space. Room still for everything that needed to happen.